All right. Hello, everyone, and thank you for being here. My name is Paul D'Ambrosio, and I teach Chinese philosophy at East China Normal University, where the 四海为学 Collaborative Learning Project is based. I want to welcome everyone to our 16th roundtable and our 67th event since 2022. Today, we are hosting a discussion titled Korean Women Confucians and the History of Philosophy. Joining us as invited discussants are Professor Philip J. Ivanhoe from Georgetown University, Professor Hwa Yeong Wang from Duke Kunshan University, and Professor Hope Sample from Carleton College. Our chair today is Professor Minjun Yu from Zhejiang University. It has become a tradition here at 四海为学 to give younger scholars a chance to be part of high-profile academic events by inviting them to take part as chairs or discussants. So if there are any younger scholars in the audience today who wish to be part of future events, please email me or talk to me in the chat. This event today will be 2 hours total, ending promptly at 11 a.m. Beijing time. Before getting things started and handing them over to Professor Yu, I want to say a few things about 四海为学 Collaborative Learning Forum. The 四海为学 Collaborative Learning Project hopes to distinguish itself from some of the less productive conventional practices found in contemporary academia. As posted on our website, we are not interested in male peacocks, in jerks, or in any form of egoism or self-promotion. We hope to curb all types of aggressive and "look at me, I'm smarter than you," or "don't I know so much," and similar attitudes sometimes found in academic exchanges. We might even go so far as to say that we hope to be somewhat of a counterbalance for the negative attitudes often found in so-called blind reviews. While there is certainly a time and a place for anonymity, or at least the appearance of anonymity, there should be just as much time and place in academia for communication that happens in more congenial and community-forming settings. The neologism 四海为学, which was created by Robin Wang, is a play on 四海为家, and we hope to keep this idea of 四海为家at the foreground of all of our events. The 四海为学 Collaborative Learning Project seeks to accomplish these shifts in orientation during academic exchange by encouraging productive communication, humble discussions, real questions, and responses that are open and honest. We hope to foster environments where people can truly learn from and with one another. Before introducing our chair, I want to once again thank everyone for being here, and especially the discussants for sharing their views. Our chair today is Professor Minjun Yu. She is Associate Professor at the Korean Studies Institute in the School of History at Zhejiang University. She holds a PhD in literature and previously worked as a postdoctoral fellow at the School of Philosophy at Fudan University. Her research focus is on East Asian Confucianism, classical literary theory, and pre-modern intellectual history. She has published multilingual works, including a Korean monograph, The Rhetoric of Confucian Classics, Epistemology in the Classics in 3 East Asian Countries. She is currently working on a project that examines Chinese, Korean, and Japanese intellectuals' interpretations of benevolence, or ren, in the Analects from the 17th and 19th centuries. Thank you very much for being here, Professor Yo. The screen is yours.
Thank you, Professor Paul, introducing me. And I'm Jung Yu. And let me introduce the three speakers of our roundtable. The first speaker and participant, Professor J. Ivanhoe, PhD from Stanford University, is Professor Emeritus in the Department's East Asian Language and Culture at Georgetown University. And he specializes in the history of East Asian philosophy and religion, and in how these traditions can contribute to contemporary ethics and the betterment of life. has held numerous endowed chair positions, including Distinguished Chair Professor of Philosophy at Kunshan University, Chair Professor of East Asian Comparative Philosophy and Religion at City University of Hong Kong, John Finland, visiting Distinguished Professor of Philosophy at Boston University, and Austin J. Faculty as a Distinguished Visitor Philosopher, Professor at Santa Clara University. Professor Ivanhoe has published more than 30 books and over 100 articles. He remains a leading figure in the study of East Asian thought. And now the next speaker, Professor Hwa Yeong Wang. She is an assistant professor of philosophy at Kunshan University. Her work bridges East Asian and comparative philosophy, exploring how Confucian traditions can address contemporary questions about gender, ritual, and ethical life. At Kunshan University, she teaches and researches how Confucian thought has engaged and continues to engage questions of gender, agency, and moral life. She is the co-translator and co-editor of two books. The one is Korean Women Philosophers and the Idol of a Female Says, the essential writing of Im Yun-ji-dang and Kang Jong-e-dang, Oxford University Press, 2023. Actually, it will be a kind of a main material of this roundtable. And then readings. The second is the readings in Korean for Confucian philosophy, Hackett First Coming. Her recent writing appears in East Asian Philosophy and the Journal of Chinese Philosophy. Through both research and teaching, she aims to bring classical Confucian ideas into conversation with modern reflection on gender, virtue, and human flourishing. And then the last speaker of our roundtable is Hope Sample Professor. She is an assistant professor of philosophy at Carleton College in Minnesota. She works on the history of 17th and 18th century philosophy. She also collaborates with Dr. Hwa Yeong Wang on the comparative philosophy projects that push Anne Coy and Im Yun-ji-dang into conversation on the metaphysics of moral quality. So thank you all for being here. And then let's start our roundtable. And then let me quickly outline our format. Each scholar will present for 10 minutes, followed by two short dialogue sessions, 7 minutes each, with the other participants. And then we will then move to an open discussion with the audience. And then let's begin with Professor Ivanhoe first. You need to turn on the mic, Professor Ivanhoe. Yeah, good.
Yeah. All right. So thank you so much for both of you and Paul for those nice introductions. And I'm really happy to be here in the company of Professors Wang and Sample and the rest of you. So I'll just say a few things about the project that Professor Wang and I undertook together on Im Yun-ji-dang and Gang Jung-il-dang, and what was attractive about it to me. And then I'll just note a couple of particulars that we discuss in the book that I think are of general philosophical interest, as well as of the particular two thinkers we looked at. I mean, for me, it was I started reading the writings of these two women many years ago, back when I was in Hong Kong, and had a couple of colleagues who were interested in this same material. And for me, it was just remarkable. I had never heard of women who had written, quite substantial amounts of philosophy that nobody seemed to really know that much about. when we look at women in Confucianism on the Chinese side, almost all of the sources are written by men about women. So here we had these very robust oeuvres, collections of work written by two women. And as Professor Wang noted, the second, Gan Zhulidang, took Im Yunjidang as kind of a model and a kind of, and so we have actually a kind of Dao Tung. We have a kind of, a transmission of womanly writing here in Korea. So I thought all of that was initially very, very attractive. But then I said, well, how is the writing? And how is the thinking? And I was even more pleased to find them writing in very elegant classical Chinese and writing things that I thought were original and in some ways, in my experience, unique. And so let me just give you a couple of the things that I thought were highly original and one that was unique. When we looked at Im Yunjidang, she wrote in a lot of different genres, one of them being the nun or lun style of writing, a kind of short essay, and which a number of, it was a standard genre that people wrote in at the time. And one of her pieces, one of her essays in this form, was on a very well-known passage in the Analects about a man named Wei Shengao or Mi Sengo, who a friend came to want to borrow vinegar from him, and he didn't have any, so he went kind of snuck off to a neighbor and borrowed it, and then gave it to this person that needed it, and he's been criticized in various ways for this action, and it's a lovely essay, and it reminded us of the famous example in modern Western philosophy of the druggist who wouldn't sell a drug to this young man, and so he stole the his solution was to steal the drug, or at least that was one of the solutions offered. This was done by a guy named Kohlberg, who said, if somebody needed a drug, if your wife in this case needed a drug to save her life and you couldn't afford it, how should you deal with that? And he asked a bunch of different people, and he then ranked their kind of philosophical acumen based on their answers. And all the men, not all, but more of the men said things like, you should go and steal the drug because life is more important than money, right? And some of the women said, well, look, why doesn't he go and talk to the druggist, or why doesn't he consult with his friends and family and try to raise the money? And this was later looked at very famously by Carol Gilligan, and said, well, this is just a different style of doing, philosophy, ethical philosophy. It's not higher or lower, it's more relational. And that's kind of what Im Yunjidang said. But what was, I thought, so original about her kind of parallel case is she was very worried about what some philosophers call moral grandstanding. That is, if you ask me for something and I go and ask Professor Wang for it, and she loans it, lends it to me, and then I provide it to you, it seems like I'm doing you a big favor, right? So she was very, very worried about, hey, look, you should make clear that you're relying on these other. So that's kind of a dimension of this kind of relational ethical reasoning that was never been explored, as far as I know, in the Western tradition. And here she has this really original case. Another one, just moving on very quickly, was another example is this guy Wen Jiao or Ungyo, who is very famous for when his king or ruler assigned him a mission, he just left immediately to go and do this, and he tore himself out of his mother's arm and he ripped the lapel on his jacket. And he was like, thought, oh, what a loyal guy he was, blah, blah, blah. And Im said, look, uh, she raised a bunch of questions about this. Was he really the only guy that could do this? Was and this again reminded us of Sartre's famous example of the young man who's should he stay with his mother or fight with the Free French? But here again, she came up with, I thought, some very original things like, yeah, are you the only one that could do this? Is there another way you could maybe realize that end? But she was really concerned primarily with how could you leave your mother, just tear yourself out of her arms and not explain to her what was going on? You should have explained to her the importance of this mission. Maybe you are the only person that could, successfully pull it off. And if he would have done that, she might very well have said, go with my blessing. But to just ignore her, is a really ethical failing. And again, so she's looking at dimensions of similar kinds of moral quandary situations that I thought got ignored, have been ignored and still are ignored. I think these are really not only fascinating historically, but live issues. And then finally, I'm going to, I think, stay within my 10 minutes. When we turn to Gang's writings, among her writings are quite a number of what are short messages or short letters, or today they would be text messages, I guess, short missives that she exchanged with her husband. And these concerned everything from how he was running his school, because he had a shuyuan, so on, and how he conducted himself, how sometimes he interacted with his own relatives, and they were often quite critical. Um, uh, you know, uh, Professor Wang knows my wife, and I think she particularly liked seeing these because it reminded her of what my wife, how she instructs me, which I am very blessed to have. Uh, but we were just really so surprised to find this intimate exchange between husband and wife, and her philosophical acumen was again very impressive about what she was raising to him. And you saw kind of the day to day. Well, here's how two sophisticated Confucians, a man and a woman who happen to be married, were actually dealing with living a Confucian life. She brought to him cases about, when they were entertaining people, they were very poor. So she had to make all of these hard decisions, these trade-offs. And she says, this is how I handled it to try to do, realize these moral ends. And it was like, I've never seen material like this about this intimacy. And among many things in this, I'll only mention one that I just found philosophically very enlightening was how she could speak so decisively and incisively to him. And again, this reminds me, I'll just be an autobiographer. I feel this way about my own spouse and also my very dear friends who know me really well, right? So they can, they know how, the kinds of things that I might do to try to evade or rationalize what I'm doing. But also, I trust them so much that they can tell me things that from another person I just might not pay really close attention. So I thought, oh, here, this also brings up this idea about how the intimate bond between husband and wife, and I assume other family members, can be a platform for moral learning because of this background of deep and extended trust and experience that two people have. So in both of these ways, and with these two remarkable women, I felt I was given a chance to see dimensions of not just the lives of Confucian women, but the lives of Confucians being lived out in real time, or a record of that. And so I find this material extremely interesting. And yeah, I think I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you for Professor Ivanhoe's speaking. And then now moves on the two discussions. And then the first discussion is Professor Wang, Hwa Yeong Wang, and then, yeah,
Okay,
welcome.
Thank you. Again, it's a really great pleasure, especially to discuss about these fascinating women with my long and good collaborators. Uh, I mean, I'll actually just ask two questions to you, PJ, first. I mean, we've been, I think, discussing many things, but today you just reminded your talk. It reminded me two questions, actually. I didn't think I had a chance to ask you. So since our translation was published in 2 years ago already, that many people have been paying attention to our to this work. And one of the questions that I very often receive is why it was in Korea, and then especially I think when they ask this question, I think they are also thinking specifically, like for example, Ban Zhao, like there are women figures also in history of Chinese philosophy or Chinese history. So they were curious actually. So I know you are also very interested in gender and women issues. So I'm a little, I would like to hear what you thought when what do you think? You already know Banzhao, right?
Yeah, I do. But Ban Jiao was really a historian, right? She's not writing I mean, as self-consciously as a philosopher and not presenting herself primarily as a philosopher, but as a historian. Whereas these two women were, both doing exactly that. They saw themselves as philosophers. In fact, they do address, as you know, from time to time, with some frustration. Hey, how come I can't kind of be out there in the broad world, engaging other men primarily in discussion? Um, so I think that they're still unique in my experience, and the yes, Banjiao is read, and there's some very good work, as you know, on this even in English, but I think probably the person that is most cited is or the work that's most cited is the Lianuzhuan, which is about women, but is by a man. So I think that the fact that these are self-consciously women that are seeking to define themselves as philosophers and speaking in their own voice, I think it makes it. Oh, I mean, one final thing is that because they were under a patriarchal oppression, which I hope no one takes offense, but I just think that's a fact. Um, it's amazing how they found a way to do this in more with her because she had brothers who really supported this, and then they kind of introduced her and served as intermediaries. Um, the fact that her husband died young and she lost her one child, she had she was in a situation where she could pursue her interests. uh, Gang I mean, is just incredible because they were so poor, and she was an autodidact. She taught herself and kind of helped her husband trying to pass the imperial exams. So, again, I don't know that I know there were women like doing these kinds of things in China. I just maybe I'm just ignorant, but I haven't ever seen anybody write on that or reveal those sources. And I just think that that's one of the reasons this is a particular treasure, not only for the Korean people, but for the world. You
Yeah. Oh, I think I have 2 more minutes around. Can I ask one more question?
Okay.
Yes,
Yeah.
you can.
Yeah. So now, thank you so much for your answer. And then I have a second question about the 강정일당. I mean, we briefly talked before. One of the issue for 강정일당, although today also you mentioned that is the genre of her writings, right?
Yeah.
Because of the genre of her remaining works are mostly non-philosophical tradition or non-traditionally philosophical. So I think that is quite problematic to be for Kang Jung-il to be recognized as a philosopher different from Im Yoon-ji-dang. Do you
Yeah.
would like to talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, that's a great question. And yeah, mostly she wrote poetry and these letters, of course. She did have a couple of other small things, one of which I guess, one more substantial that was lost. But yeah, this is why, as you know, she's in Korea even, she's looked at more as a literature figure than a philosopher. But I would say, well, look, Neo-Confucians, every Neo-Confucian wrote a lot of philosophical poetry. I mean, if you look at the great, the Dasan or Tege, they all wrote remarkable amounts of poetry that were philosophical, and they thought this was serious, not only as literature, but as philosophy. And of course, their philosophical writings had literary qualities. Professor Yu has researched, you always researched this about this. You really shouldn't be dividing up literature and philosophy in some ways in these strict ways, that obscures as well as. So yeah, I mean, I would say, look, lots of people wrote philosophical poetry. A lot of people in the West in the early tradition, and then letters. There's a lot of philosophers that did their philosophizing through letters. So again, I think this is just a prejudice of our contemporary uh, way of doing philosophy rather than in some principled reason for not considering these. But it is a good reason to elevate that and to examine it now as a special um, a feature of their work. Yeah.
Thank you for the question and the wonderful answer. And now move to Professor Hobbs at this discussion.
Yes, thank you so much. And I'm so grateful for your translation, which I've been using in my classes, and my students love it. So I just want to say that from the start. I had two thoughts. One was about genre and for Gong. And kind of following up on Professor Wang's comment, I actually thought that, well, one, you covered the poetry part of it, but I thought that her text message almost style of writing was actually ideal because it actually gives you very concrete cases, and because, like, as I understand it, like, Neo-Confucianism is a relational concrete ethics about how to live life. And so actually I found, and I think my students did too, found her that short kind of very targeted deep analysis of examples actually to be the most helpful for thinking things through. So I just wanted to ask you if you had thought that maybe there's a way in which that non-traditional kind of style actually is even maybe better in some ways for bringing things out.
Yeah, that's great. And I think that's just the kind of way we should approach these and other texts, and not just saying, oh, well, it doesn't fit our standard box, so somehow it's deficient. But maybe no, it's not a bug, it's a feature, as we used to say in the programming world. So yeah, no, I think, I mean, there are other people like Wittgenstein wrote a very important book in this kind of very short kind of style. But I agree with you. I think that here we get people dealing with practical problems, and you don't need to write a whole essay in a certain way to get at to frame the problem and get it out there. So I found that teaching that particularly is very effective because it gives people an entree into, it sets an issue and they're able to jump in there. And again, I would just go back to a little bit of what Professor Wang and I argued in the book was, you know, people, it's a commonplace that everyone says, oh, the five relationships, Confucianism's relational and it's blah, 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 and it's all this, and husband and wife, or many people argue it's like yin and yang, the beginning of the universe, and all. But where are the texts where men and women, husbands and wives are actually talking to each other? I don't know. But here's one place where you get a lot of it, and so again, it's to me revealing, but also challenging. And when I think about my own life, my wife was a philosopher. She graduated Nankai Dashi, and worked on Nietzsche, so she's always telling me how there's everything's meaningless and I have no will to power. But no, she's but we often have a really, I mean, we regularly have very interesting conversations about what I think are fundamental philosophical issues, but they're cast in terms of our lives. What's going on in the political world, or what's going on in our family, or what's going on with, this weird person at the door. So yeah, I think that that's a feature, not a shortcoming. And I think it should open people's eyes not only to her work, but to how we philosophize.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, and just one more. I think we got a few minutes maybe. So one thing that strikes me, sorry, it's another Gong point. I'm obsessed. But
Yeah.
uh she is very hard on herself.
Yeah.
Like she is and that's very striking. And then my students are like struck by that. They're like, "Oh my gosh." You know, like and I'm just even over things she can't control, like the loss of family members, or her children, or, and it's just like, or not having enough, even though she was a seamstress, like she worked so hard and she was the breadwinner. So like, I don't know, is that striking to you too? And is there any kind of philosophical significance for you? Like, is it something about Neo-Confucianism, or is it just about Gong, or is it something else?
Yeah, well, I think Neo-Confucians in general, and historical people, when I read about the lives of people in the past, when a man I studied, Jung, I remember this one essay where he's talking about moving his family from a town in southern China up to just outside of Beijing, where he had a very temporary work opportunity. And moving his family meant moving about 30 people and moving the coffins of his parents, who he hasn't found a proper place to bury them, and moving all of his, and they're in these carts and they're going down the road and then going, and I went, oh my gosh, if I have to order the dinner twice in a row, I consider that really hard pressed. So I mean, what these folks endured and kept going with a good attitude. I mean, in the case of Gan, she had 9 children, all of whom died before they could speak. And there's that one thing that we translated, a kind of addressing her daughter, the last child. And I went like, oh my God, I would go out of my gourd. I mean, you know, and also that like as you said, she was the breadwinner and they were just barely hanging on. So, but she never, she really had this inspirational, hey, look, I'm measuring myself by what kind of person I am and how the lives we're living. That's, I'm just actually reading Emerson's essays right now. And, it's that kind of Puritan kind of, or that kind of, Protestant, like, stop complaining, and don't worry about material things. And whatever you may not share some of the theological things, but as an attitude and as how they live their lives, I just find both of these women massively impressive. And Gang, I mean, in a way, in particular, I mean, because she just had a harder environment and a harder road to hoe, in my view. Yeah.
Thank you for the answer and the question. And then now we move to the second speaker, Professor Hwa Yeong. Yeah. Please turn on your mic. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Again, it's a great pleasure to talk here with my collaborators and many people who are interested in these women. I also want to start with a small the personal account about this project when how I started. Actually, I got to know about analyst Zhejiang, one of one of the first philosophers, around like early 2000, and I was doing my master's degree. And when I found out, I was doing a master's degree in Confucian philosophy in Korea. And when I found out about her existence, and I was so excited. And I just ran to my advisor and just said, Professor, I found, there is this kind of woman Confucian. And I still so vividly remember after more than 2 decades that his first reaction was, are you sure? And maybe if so, maybe their writings are just some simple records of her reading Confucian classics. And and that was my just end of the thing, actually. And then because I thought, but okay, that maybe they are not important philosophically. And also afterwards, I also, there were, a lot of research scholarship on Im Yun-jidang and Kang Jung-il-dang in Korea by Korean philosophers, but Korean scholars, but they are mainly discussed as a literature or history, or the best intellectual history. So that was why when I met first time Professor Ivanhoe, when he expressed his interest in translating these two women. I didn't know about Kang Jung-dang much, honestly speaking, at the time. So I was a little bit not sure, but it was a great opportunity to read their works by myself and to find out. So that was why I started. And I think, when people read, like as Professor Semple mentioned, then more and more people, they read the translated works, and they found some good inspirations. I'm very happy. So today I just want to add a little bit about some historical perspective, because can I share my slide briefly? Briefly, is it okay? Yeah.
Sure, you can.
Yeah, because I just wanted to show some the great pictures that
Cool. Great.
yeah.
Fantastic.
So yeah, can you see? Yeah. So I just wanted to show that, these were the rewritings, that the original writings, text by Im Yun-jidang and Kang Jung-il-dang, those two Korean women philosophers we are talking today. And this is our book. I'm very proud of this book. So I really want to also share this, that if anyone interested. And also, at least we have one portrait about Im Yun-jidang. This is, of course, not the original one. It was commissioned and then made in 2017. But the story was very interesting because in 2017, the painter, when he was commissioned, then actually he visited the descendants of Im Yun-jidang and kind of collected the facial characteristics of her modern descendants, and then just made this one. So it's not exactly the old one, but I think it's a really good work to show about one of our philosophers. So I just wanted to share some visuals. So as I already asked to Professor Ivan, that whenever I go and give talk about these two women philosophers, one of the questions is, why was it in Korea? And why not in China? And also, if you know a little bit more about Korean history, that is even more amazing, because when the Neo-Confucianism was imported, and then the Korean Neo-Confucianism started to provide as a very founding ideologies in every aspect of the statehood, not only the state level, but everyone's life, that many people thought that, especially from women's perspective, was it must have a bad impact. So, for example, the 17th century, when after a couple of hundreds later, that if you read the history of Korean women, then 17th century is marked as a dark age for women. So all these ongoing efforts to shape women in accordance with Confucian values and norms that highlighted women's womanly, their moral conduct, and that was very patriarchal. So that's why that many people thought it's even more surprising if you know the Korean history. And then I actually say that Professor Ivanhoe mentioned about some personal things, but there was also ongoing the development among the Korean women. So even before Im Yunjidang's time, that there some historians says the intellectual historian of Korea says that there was a kind of an increase in consciousness among women, and then they started to write more and in a different genres. So there was a kind of it was not simply a dark age for women, but women were also creating and then increasing their consciousness, and also probably I think it was a kind of reappropriating what the Neo-Confucianism they taught them. So I think that we should also acknowledge that there was already there's some arising consciousness among Korean women too. And then also these two Korean women philosophers, they received this new Confucian philosophy education, and they found the resources for their being the sagehood. So they really pursued that. They really, oh, even I can also become a sages. Doesn't matter that I am a woman. So Im Yunjidang actually famously said, although I am a woman, the nature I was endowed, there is no difference between men and women. So I think also the Neo-Confucian philosophy, especially like metaphysics, also actually provided, or we can say these women reappropriated what they have learned to for themselves. So with this kind of, there was a rise of new consciousness, and also this there were also definitely some personal stories too. So in Yunjidang's case, she lived about 50 years earlier than Kang Jung-il. The socially, the Korea was a little bit better situation at that time, and Im Yunjidang also was financially better. So she kind of like we can say she had her own room. So although during the day she had to fulfill all womanly responsibilities, but once she was retired behind the closed door, she could she could have her own room that she could devote to her own study. Uh, so I think that was one of the also the important thing. And also she definitely had a male figures around her, her brothers who were really, they were exchanging the philosophical letters. And but of course, the another one, the Kang Jung-il case, her life was very different. The financially hard pressed. So actually, I think that she lived in a really poverty basically, and we just heard that her personal tragedies, but maybe that's why she didn't even have the time to uh, actually write and sit and write, but she had to do her philosophy while she was living everyday life. So through the conduct and every, the chances for that she can write, even it can be as poetry or also exchanging the short text messages. And we also have a one poetry that even when she was reading and at her her backyard, she was thinking about what would the Zhuangzi would say. So I think these are the two some historical and personal stories that are amazing. I found. Yeah.
Thank you for the wonderful story about Im Yunjidang and Kang Jung-il and then your own work. And then let's move to the discussion. The first discussion is discussant Professor Ivanhoe. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So now it's been a while since our book has come out. And so I'm just wondering, and you're there in China, I'm here in
Mhm.
our little house in New Jersey, and
Mhm.
so I'm just wondering what have you been able to integrate this into your teaching, and have colleagues shown interest? I've gotten some
Mhm.
queries over email, which I've been very
Mhm.
pleased to, but I'm just wondering, have you been able
Mhm.
to, and has this opened up other avenues of research for you?
Mhm. Thank you for your questions. Yes, I also tried as much as I can, and then also and I received some new opportunities. So, for example, here, there's several places also invited me, like King Wonzhou University and Wuhan University. So those and there were scholars who are very interested in our two Korean women philosophers, and also recently, I also received an invitation from actually two invitations from Europe. So there are European scholars who are interested in early modern history of philosophy and who are focusing on the women and then or maybe let's say diversifying the philosophy. So they are actually very interested in to learn more about the image Zhejiang and Zhejiang. So I will be participating in the lectures and seminars. These are some just examples that I do. And also, and I also teach a couple of courses here. So, for example, I teach Confucianism and feminism. It's a writing course, but and also I teach history of Chinese philosophy, and as a way of diversifying the Korean philosophy curriculum, and also integrating that like students love to actually learn what their professors do, right? Their research. So I actually integrate these two Korean women philosophers, and they still also find that wow, I mean many, and I think it's still, the students will say there were women in history of philosophy. So I think it's more. It's also true for many, not only in Asia, right? But also in basically. So whenever I do some experiment and ask my students, okay, close your eyes. Think about philosopher. What kind of image comes up? And we always, they will say, white guy with a beard and curly hair, white, right? So
Yeah.
I think that since that is the reality, they found it extremely interesting and fascinating. So I try to teach them. One of the still that I would define, I would say that still that there is I found that there is still the tendency that people found to believe in traditional philosophy. So it's a little bit hard to advocate for Kang Jung-yeon. It's easier in a sense for Im Jung-yeon's case because she wrote in the traditional philosophical genres, but Kang's not. So I think that's one of the things that how I can introduce and teach Kang Jung-yeon more better. It seems like I need to talk to Professor Sample more.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, it's always good to talk to Professor Sample, but I mean, I think one way you might do it is to look at some of the Neo-Confucians who who wrote a lot of poetry. I mean, Zhu Xi wrote a lot of poetry. Wang Yangming wrote a lot of great poetry. Lu Xiangshan. In fact, it's hard pressed to think of somebody who didn't write a lot of good philosophical poetry. And to kind of say, look, this isn't kind of off the reservation. This is just one viable genre. And I think your point is really important that given her life, she had to write in the interstices between nine babies, a lot of needlework, making sure her husband's not going off the rails. So, to contextualize it and then and finally, I mean, I just think that, dialogue is the way that philosophy began in the West, and it's the way it began in China. I mean, the Lunyu is not a bunch of articles that are coming out in Phil Review, right? They're dialogues between the master and various other people, and the Platonic dialogues are such. So, to challenge this idea of genre, and I think that might then spur people on who know parts of the Chinese tradition or Japanese tradition that I don't know, that they might find more examples of women's writings in these alternative genres that are being ignored as philosophy because they're not paying attention to the diversity of genre.
That's a great ideas. Thank you so much. Maybe later I will get in touch with you and ask a little more, discuss more. Yeah, thank you so much.
Oh,
So the second discussion move to
yeah.
Professor Paul. Yeah.
Yes. So I was glad you brought up the where Gong is like she's sitting in the garden and she's like practicing. She's like so there's something I don't really know like you know I think it's interesting idea, right? Like there's something philosophical about that or that can be a philosophical practice, but coming from like me being trained in like European history of like European philosophy, there's like nothing like that. So I feel like one of the things that's exciting to me about it is how much it gets to expand like my understanding and how to think about things. Is there something, I don't know how you're thinking about it, but do you think, is there something that like that kind of physical kind of experience is going to give us that would be giving us something more than just like reading an essay, like in a or reading something from a traditional genre. I don't know if this is something you've kind of been going over or if you have any thoughts on it.
Oh, thank you for the question. Yeah, I don't have the definite answer, but that is definitely one thing I'm pondering for a long time. One thing I can say is probably that's the difference is between the Neo Confucianism and probably your tradition, because for for me for me I think the Neo Confucianism and also I think the ancient East Asian philosophical traditions are also mostly that the theory and practice are inseparable. So for Neo Confucians, so there are the two schools within that. So one is the Zhongzhu, Zhang brothers, and then Juxi, this Orthodox. And the other line is Wang Yangming, famous Yangming school. And then they tend to, there is a discussion what is the differences between them. And at one point, but still, some people say that the Chongju Orthodox more they emphasize on the more knowledge learning. So, while the one on Yangming is actually the practice side, there are the reasons also. So, well, I think if I remember correctly, PJ and I had a conversation about the differences between these two schools, probably the different ways of learning. So, so anyway, so that's one example that how it is, and it's also in Confucianism. Also, the Zhong Orthodox that this Iminjidang and Kangjang Dang are within, they are part of, that still, although that this Orthodox emphasized the knowledge learning, doesn't mean that practice was not important or could be separated. So, for example, for Zhu Xi and other philosophers, they were the everyday like ritual was a very important part of their philosophy, and also how they taught, at their academies. So and I'm sure that their everyday life was also he discussed with their students what to do, how to do, and why we have to do. So yeah, I think that's why it is. So for Kangjang Tang, I am recently thinking that uh, before my the academic background that I was trained mainly in the Jeongju Orthodox in Korea, then I probably unconsciously was focused more on the Jeongju like theory learning, probably knowledge learning. Then when I was reading Kang Jung-tang, I think I started to understand why Yang Ming had to say such a thing. Because if you live in the life such a way, then maybe the way of learning or doing philosophy must be different.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I'm sorry, how many minutes do I have, or am I at, oh, sorry, 2 minutes? Okay, just to follow up on that, the Wang Yangming sort of approach seems more accessible to women. So as I understand it, I think you guys argued that they're kind of maybe more orthodox, and I can see why, because they're certainly both of them are referencing the text. But it does strike me that, especially in those moments of like she's in the garden, that maybe it would be better to move towards that. If you're under conditions of patriarchy that say like whether you learn to read or not depends on whether your family decides, you know, decides that that's actually better for people living under conditions of oppression. I don't know if you would agree.
Yeah, I think so. So, I mean, that's definitely very obvious, visible in when we learn her life and also writings, but also at the same time is a well, so that's one thing that I realized that is important. But also at the same time, I want to also kind of balance what I just said, because we have to also, remember that Tang Zheng also put great effort to reading classics and learning, getting the knowledge.
Yeah.
So she says that she started to learning Confucian classics at the age of 30 next to her husband. And if you read, right, then you can find that she was constantly asking her husband, "Hey, go and borrow these books from your colleagues and ask this question to your teacher." So I think they're both were important. Also, I think it's important to remember that.
Thank you for the question, the answer. And then now we move to the third speaker, Professor Sample.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm okay. I had told Professor Wang I was going to talk about one thing, but now I'm tempted to talk about something else based on our conversation. I hope that's okay. Um, it's striking to me because Eam argues that, like Professor Wang said, that, even I can, as a woman, can be a sage, and this is because her essential nature is the same, pattern principle is one in all things. And so it's a really like, as Professor Ivanhoe and Wang point out in their books, it's like maybe not unusual for people to say in this tradition anyone can be a sage, but it's unusual to make an metaphysical argument of this sort. And so I think one of the things that interests me here is the interplay between Gong and Eam on this issue, because Eam, as they've said, is clearly taking Eam as a model, is responding to like specific readings that she gives of classic stories, like is referencing her texts. But one thing that strikes me is that and then this is where my participants can correct me on this. I don't see Eam talking about limitations that women face towards being a sage, but I could be wrong, and then you're going to come up with examples for me, and that would be great. Whereas Gong, I think, in my reading of her, actually kind of challenges a bit Eam's argument. I mean, she cites Eam's argument, and she doesn't, but what she does next is she asks her husband what he thinks about it. And that's not to say she says it's wrong. I just want to be clear. She in no way indicates that she thinks Eam is wrong in her argument. It's just there's a question. And to me, that's like very telling. Whereas, in another passage where she's referencing Eam, and I can't remember the precise story, but she's very vehement that Eam's take on this is correct. And she's very explicit. And so when I look at those two passages side by side, it's interesting. Because on the one hand, she's citing Eam and she's very clearly like, this is the correct and only answer. And in the other, she's citing this, passage on equality, and she asks a question. So it's unclear. And then that paired with another passage where she talks about women not being taught to read. And I must say that, like Prof. Wan was talking about the history, and I've learned a lot about it from her. I do understand that literacy increased for women during this time period. So even though it may be generally a sort of dark period, like Confucian emphasis on learning, literacy increased, but still women were at the mercy of what would their family decided or whether they were an autodidact. Wish we could all be, right? We're not all autodidacts, right? So she's and what she says is like this is crazy. I mean, I'm obviously she doesn't say what I'm saying. I'm kind of paraphrasing, but she's basically like this is crazy that people are not teaching their young women to read because then they'll never know they won't know what's right. They won't have ethical knowledge. This kind of goes back to the Orthodox, I think, to my mind. This goes back to the Orthodox reading, which seems kind of clear, right? They're saying you need to have read and studied the classics yourself and then discuss them. And I'm like, I'm thinking like when I see that paired with a question mark kind of after referencing Eames' argument for equality, I think, well, maybe, and of course these passages are happening in different places, so it's not like they're not happening sequentially after each other, but I'm thinking like, is she challenging this claim to be able that even I as a woman can be a sage? Because if we have the Orthodox view, to be a sage was going to require literacy, but whether you're literate or not, unless you're an autodidact qualification, is not totally up to you. So yeah, so I think this is kind of something I've thought about a lot, and I just, sorry I diverted. I was going to talk about Conway. I'll say something brief about our project, but I just wanted to say that because I think there's some like really interesting stuff going on there, and I'd love to read Professor Wang's paper on this eventually. Okay. Do I have like 4 minutes, or I'm sorry, is it 4 or 3? 5. Okay. Now I'm going to do a transition to just maybe briefly talking about a project that Professor Wang and so Professor Wang just really kindly shared her translations with us, their co-authored translations, even before it was published. So I had the opportunity to share it with my students. Um, and over the period of time, we've got to know each other, we've become friends, and it's been wonderful learning from her and trying to, talking about my figures, Anne Conway. She's a 17th century British philosopher. She's a Platonist. She's a Quaker. She's a Kabbalist. So she has a lot of interesting kind of influences on her. And so in her system as a Quaker, she's got God, Christ, and created beings. That's kind of her metaphysical kind of worldview. And then um, Christ emanates, everything else is created. But one of the things that Prof. Wang and I have kind of connected on is that, Eam has this theme of equality, kind of just like from the first half of my querying about Gong and Eam on this question of equality. Conway is also committed to a radical equality. It is her view that because God is so loving, anything he creates must be able to achieve the highest level of development, which, so if it's sagehood in the Neo-Confucian tradition, it's salvation in her kind of Christian, kind of philosophical, theological view. But what that means then is that, because look around you, there's like, lamps, tables, plants, all these things. So if you take that literally, and she means it literally, she means literally everything is on a process of transformation towards higher perfection. So like a rock could turn into a plant, could turn into an animal, turn into a human, and then eventually an angel is like the kind of highest level. So it has a kind of doctrine of like kind of reincarnation, I guess, but I'm using that term as a comparison. I don't want to say that it's exactly the same thing, but we're imagining like, something kind of continuing on in its life process until it reaches that. And it is her view that we have infinite time to do that. And that's also part of her conception of a loving God, because her thought is, well, we learn from experience. And so not only do the ways that we experience the world change as our bodies change, the way a rock, experiences, like when the sun shines on it, it gets warm, so the way different stages of life experience things give rise to different types of knowledge. So we have these bodily transformation and the time to really develop ourselves to the highest potential. Um, and it's only in her system that once we get to like animals, like she'll talk about a horse having virtue. It's only once we get to like higher like animals and then humans that we get these like higher cognitive capacities where we can decide whether we want to do the right thing or not. Yeah, she says that about horses too. Horses, they know what they're doing. They know if they want to do the right thing or the wrong thing. Um, but it's just been interesting kind of comparing their systems, simply because, well, first of all, there's a God in Conway's system, no God, no God in Eames. We've got pattern principle, but whenever we try to, we're seeing kind of like resonances between these systems, but also interesting differences. So like in Conway's system, there are do-overs. For in the Neo-Confucian system, there is no do-over. And so you can kind of see how the sense of time is very different in there. Like, when Gong is saying, like, I've wasted all these years, starting at 30, and again, paraphrasing, not using her direct words, there isn't something like that in Conway. Because no matter what, at some point, because this is another part of her system, any kind of things that are setbacks or things where you do things that are sinful, they bring some kind of punishment. So the idea is there's some kind of response, but that's like imminent in creation. So you may not know when it's going to happen, but it's going to happen. But the idea is if there's any kind of punishment, which again wouldn't fit into Eames' kind of perspective because there isn't this God, it must bring you back to the good, because otherwise God would be evil. He would just be punishing you pointlessly. So there's just lots of, yeah, so I'm just throwing out some different things that we've been kind of comparing in this project, and probably should just maybe kind of bring it to a close there and just say we're in the process of kind of developing these ideas, and it's been a lot of fun, looking for differences and similarities and what differences they might make.
Thank you for your talk. And then now we move to the discussion session. And the first discussant is Professor Ivanhoe. Please start.
Yeah, thank you, Professor Sample. As you were talking, I was thinking, well, you and Professor Wang are maybe on this process clearly moving toward perfection. So, and so, well, I hope we won't have to wait. I don't think we're going to have to wait infinitely long. And I'll leave that to Professor Wang to talk about Conway and your project, and just say a few very brief things about the point you started with. I read that passage in Gong where she cites him and then ends by saying to her husband, "What do you think about this?" Not as questioning him, but and maybe here again I'm being very autobiographical, because when my wife asks me, usually when she says, "What do you think about this?" means she's really saying, "Hey, stupid, don't you agree with that?" It's her very polite way of saying, like, get with the program and pay attention to this. And that's kind of, I mean, she wouldn't say stupid, but but that's kind of what I took her to mean, is sort of like, hey, this is, I mean, it's clearly right. You're not paying enough attention to this. So her way of saying, what do you think about this, is just a kind of a prompt to get him to pay more attention to that. Because in another short missive, she really quite directly essentially says to him, you've got it so easy. You're a man. You can go off and talk with all these guys and everything. And I'm sitting here having to do all this stuff remotely. You better put a little more effort out, because, you're the one that's got this opportunity. And it's, a kind of lament of her situation. So that's just how I read that. But then I wanted to, if I may, just say one thing about, you hinted that the Lu Wang approach might be more conducive to women situation. I think I hope one of the younger people here take that up as a as to write a book or something about that. I mean, it's just the fact that the Hwa Yeong Ming school, the Yangmyung was not very popular in Korea for historical reasons, the fall of the Ming and all this stuff. But it was actually wildly popular in Japan. And one of the reasons it was wildly popular in Japan was, as it was in late Ming China, was that it said that you don't have to be a scholar to be a sage. In fact, one young Ming said, if you just focus on books, you'll never get it. He had a student that was a judge, and he said, "Oh, I have to do all these legal cases. I never get enough time to study." And one young Ming said, "That's your problem. Your gunfu, your spiritual practice is while you're listening to cases, look upon yourself and say, am I being self-centered? Am I prejudicial?" He says, you can only make moral improvement by focusing on the affairs of your actual life. So looking at theories, and that does hook up in some ways, I think, better with certain themes in China or East Asia, that self-cultivation is, philosophy is about cultivating the self. And so things like your practice in ritual, your practice day to day. I just finished this book on the Chung brothers, and Chung-Yi is just loves chapter 10 of the Analects, which talks about how Confucius wore his lapel and how he spoke and how he stood and everything. He says this is really telling you what the ambiance, the aura of the sage is really about. So I think that's something that again gets ignored often in Western things. But I do think you're right that the Wang approach, one of the reasons it was, I should have said in Japan, is that these samurai who were now no longer had lords were now going into business and working in the world. And Wang Yanming said that's perfectly fine. Just be a really good, lumberman or silk merchant or whatever it is you're doing. Do it with a pure mind, and that is your self-cultivation. If you're just sitting there reading books and writing commentaries on there, that's not going to improve you at all. So I think the under oppression or being dispossessed out of the kind of literate high culture, yes, the Wan school I think surely was historically more appealing to those in Japan. I think it should be or it could have been seen that way, and it as a point of practice. Of course, the Chungju school doesn't ignore practice, so I think that's how they interpreted those things. And surely, you can see that in Gan, where she says, I had to make a choice about what to serve for dinner here since we only have one pumpkin. And then I had to choose between these guests, what was the right thing to do. And so she's really applying Confucianism. And for her, this is a moral issue. And I think she is right. It is a moral issue how you treat people who come to your home. Um, anyhow, I think you brought something up that I hope others will run with because I think it's something worth exploring. Yeah, and
Yeah.
How many minutes is it?
1 minute.
Oh, thank you so much. I
Yeah.
appreciate the reading of hey, what do you think about this? Like, get with the program. I like that interpretation. I think that though the passage about the lamenting still kind of that one does point to an issue because if like that if discussion not only reading but if discuss I imagine that's also part of it. She's got another passage where she's pointing out if it's a necessary condition, which it is in the Orthodox, then whether or not you have access to that is a social fact. I don't know. That's I guess that would be maybe she didn't challenge her explicitly, maybe to be more careful, but I would say she had points that I think are challenging, not necessarily incompatible, but challenging.
Yeah, just let me. Yeah, I think that's right. Just two things to keep in mind. What about the society of the time is the literacy rate among men was not, you know, near universal. I mean, I don't know what the figures are in Korea, but in China, figures, people argue about the figures, but it's not, it's well below 40%. It's some people think in the 20s, right? I would also note that in our country, our benighted country, the literacy rate is about 72% right now. So, there are a lot of people that are excluded from engaging in certain kinds of activities just because the educational system is not being propagated in a certain way.
Thank you for your talk and then answer maybe. Yeah, and then now move on to the second discussant, Professor Wang. Yeah.
Oh, Hope, it's always, fascinating to talk to you whenever
Yeah.
we have a chance. You brought a new ideas. I think this is the joy that, when we do philosophy, discuss ideas with, people. So I also want to just briefly comment, and maybe you can also tell me what you think. So one thing is about Kang and her husband. Her question. What do you think? And we know that Kang's husband was not the most smart person, honestly speaking. He repeatedly failed, and I mean, I didn't want to say, but maybe he was not so smart. Maybe a little bit, yeah. So I think he repeatedly failed. So I don't think he was. So well, who knows? Maybe he was asking also, as when a professor I want to point it out that have you noticed this part? What do you think? So it could be kind of calling his attention to pay more attention, probably. Or also, I also want to highlight that when you read Kang Jung-tang's writings, that one really striking point is about their partnership, right? That this Kang Jung-tang and her husband, although I made a small joke about her husband's intellectual ability, but they were great partners towards Confucian sagehood. So they told each other, Kang Jung-tang, well, we played like almost like a teacher role, but I think they were more really a partner, more toward the moral perfection and sagehood. So I think this was probably her way to, it shows actually that passage that she was maybe calling attention, but also, really truly asking, what do you think? It's not maybe to confirm that, to confirm what she thinks from her husband. That would be my interpretation of that part after reading all that part. So yeah, that's one part. And about the second part, also the PJ mentioned briefly about the Wang Yangming, and I think it will be definitely is fascinating how we need also to delve into more, and I'm personally very fascinated by this. And I think one thing to remember that the the Ruang schools status at the time in Korea, right? History of Korea. So maybe it was not explicitly discussed and studied, but it doesn't mean that there were no scholars or who studied the Luang school. And we have like in our second translation, we included like for example Hagok Jeongjedu. So there was amazing Yangming school scholars. And also, I think we maybe think that although we presented as this two more like a Jeongju Orthodox part, partially, factually that they are from the Doron, the school, their families. But I think there should be, even that fact can be read from a different perspective, probably. So yeah, that's one thing. The last thing I also wanted to mention that it seems like you see some gap probably or differences between Yin and Yang, and actually for me that's explains actually by itself, because as I said, and then we can also read these two women in their own lineage, then I think it can make maybe better sense. So what do I mean by that is, so I said that Im Yun-Zedang and Gang Jung, between them, there were like about 50 years difference, right? So Im Yun-Zedang was the first, arguably first woman who advocated, right, very daringly for the moral equality of women, reappropriating this, the Neo-Confucian metaphysics, right? So I think that was her contribution. So as maybe the first person who ever decided, no, I think it's a shame that when I die, that my writings will be used to cover jars in the kitchen. I don't like that. She was the first person who actively made, consciously made the decision. I will write down what I'm thinking, and I will leave. I want to leave it. So I think that was her as a kind of pioneer. That was Im Yun-Zedang's role, probably to see the possibility and maybe the potentials within that. And I think that was maybe enough for one person, right? As the first figure in in history. And I think for Kang Jung-Itang's case, she somehow knew, right, read what Im Yun-Zedang said, because there was Im Yun-Zedang who already showed these potentials and possibility, and that she could follow the Im Yun-Zedang's footsteps. So then I think because she followed the Im Yun-Zedang's footsteps, she could then probably go to the next step, probably. Oh, wait, I lived through this Neo-Confucian, the ideas, but well, it seems there are some limits. So I think that's also she probably could see or experience the limits through her life, probably. So for me, that it's probably more important. We need to see these two women more on the continuity. Then probably can understand better. That's what I think.
That's really interesting. I don't know sorry, how are we on time?
2 minutes.
Yeah, I think that's a great way to think about it. It's like because the knowledge is collective, I mean, too, and it's progressive and it's passed down. Like, I know that's kind of key to the understanding of the tradition versus a Descartes who's just like, I just got it all right now, this very moment, and I've solved everything. Although he learned from priors, but tried to pretend like he didn't. So yeah, I think that fits really well. Um, yeah. I I guess one thing I thought, just very quick, is how early, from what evidence you have, was she reading Eam? Because like I'm wondering what she started with, and then, developmentally, when did she become aware of Eam, and then do you detect any changes, other wider I mean, obviously this is more than a minute thing. I'm just throwing it out there. I'd be interested to see a paper that talks about that. Or maybe you said that in your book and I missed it, but I'm not sure. I might have missed it in the book. The dating and chronology of like that.
Uh, Professor Ivanhoe can correct me if I, forgot the info we did, but I don't think we have the exact date. But I think it can be probably, that's important, probably the part that at least I can ask my historian colleagues if maybe because there are also in Korean scholarship, there are more researches. So I can probably look up more and then also have a conversation, and then I'll keep you updated. Yeah, but for now, we don't know. It is just my guess because PJ and I know their family relationships and the work. I know how they are, personally, they're teachers, and then so I know that they're academic, and also the familial relationships. So that was like, oh, it's very likely that Kang Jung-Dang was exposed to what Eames has written, probably. So, but yeah, it may be definitely more research will be beneficial.
Thank you for all participations for staying right on time, and very interesting and very thoughtful. And we like to turn the remaining time over to the audience, and we have maybe 30 minutes. So if you have any question, please feel free to raise your hands. Yeah. Oh, yes. Just Sophia O. Yeah, and then the first question begins with the Sophia O, and then next is Angela Shen. Yes. Please, Sophia O, turn on your mic.
Hello, thank you, doctors. But this question is for Dr. Wang. Actually, the existence of kind of female Confucian philosopher in old days, and also your presence as the interpreter of her, and also your Confucian philosophy yourself, it's great that not just like being a stage as a woman and possibility to read Confucian classics that are not really available for ordinary women. That is great, but beyond that, in their writing and in their philosophical kind of interpretation, are there any kind of things that are uniquely women's experience and women's kind of perspective, or even that is beyond kind of like beyond that kind of perspective as a woman's? And are there any aspect you feel like you could label them better than men scholars? Because like being in being included in the kind of male system or male philosophers, equally there, it's great. It's almost impossible for ordinary women at the time, but something that uniquely women philosopher for themselves in their philosophy and the way they interpret the men's classic into their language. That's my concern.
Thank you, Professor Oh. Thank you for your great questions. And I'm happy to elaborate a little more. Yes, there are. And I think that's one of the great part of their writings. So for example, that the in Yun Zedang's case that mother's perspective. Yeah. So she had the Professor Ivanhoe briefly mentioned about the Wanjiao case, the Ongyo case. That if you read that the text, that is very amazing that the same story was told actually many times by male Confucian philosophers before about Wanjiao, but what Yin Zedang says is very unique. And one of her originality also comes from that, I think from my experience, and Luke's maybe, that it was my first time to see that mother's perspective. So she would say that, oh, well, before, for example, if I say a little more, that the story was told by male philosophers as if this is one of the choices you make, like you choose this or the other. But one originality about the Ying's argument is that she doesn't think that it's just this or other problem, but actually there are much more complex deliberation and moral thinking. And then when she does that, she brings in the mother's perspective. If the mother has known what was going on, then she would have understood the situation and happily would have sent her son with her blessings. And so that is really amazing that she also gives some details. So I think that is what she's really amazing in their part. And I also think that really also matches that real stories we have seen that recent the war history stories, right? That when their son has to go or fight for the democratic movements, that mothers were happy actually part of that. So I think that is one great example for that. And also for Kang's case, that also she there are many cases because of her experience as a very woman in life in a sense. But everything, for example, when she was given a gift from the elderly woman, or her husband did something kind to her, this elderly lady, then she would really care, in way different moral the issues. And I haven't seen all this, the details, how she delivered it, and also the details she actually discusses is very much detailed, original, but also another story, for example, that she talks about, one of your students, and then we like this. So I think in all these kind of stories also indirectly shows how she, as a woman, paying attention to the people's context, their personal lives. And I think that is that very much unique women's perspectives I can see. I mean, I think there are more, but definitely, yes, there are.
Thank you. But how about Kang Jung-il-dang? You only talked about Im Yoon-ji.
The last part was the Kang Jung-il-dang
Oh,
story.
really?
Also,
You
when
didn't mention
yeah,
Kang.
I'm sorry.
So
Yeah,
I thought
also
it's
the
both
Kang
Im
Jung-il-dang. Yeah.
Yoon-ji. Okay, but I was
Sorry.
guessing that
Yeah.
must be Kang Jung-il. So okay, so all right. Thank you so
Sorry.
much. That's very helpful. And although I knew a little bit because I read Im Yoon-ji-dang and Kang Jung-il-dang via you and who was the Hong Kong professor moved to Shanghai? And I don't know. The Korean Confucian democracy person. Sungmoon Kim.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Someone
Sungmoon
came?
Kim. Yeah, Sungmoon Kim's Im Yoon-ji-dang. I read it and I read your piece, but so, but I just want to emphasize a little bit because for the audience, and also I learned as a feminist philosopher. So, do you think it's last very simple question? Do you think you can, although there was no name for feminist at the time, but do you think you can call them feminist philosopher?
Oh wow, that
It's
is
provocative.
it's very provocative because I used to
Yeah.
call them as feminist, and then many feminist scholars actually found it is so kind of problematic, and it actually, whenever I use label them as a feminist, that it actually invites on necessary the discussions. So that's why I'm usually very careful just use the women philosophers. But I personally do think there is, at least we can call them probably as like a precursors. So because we started to see some rise of feminist consciousness as a woman. So definitely, as I earlier mentioned to Professor Sample, that Im Yoon maybe didn't directly say, but when she said, and then I don't know, like made a decision, I will write, and for example, like declaring as a woman that I can become a sage, and also I will leave my writings behind. So these are very acts and utterance also shows some kind of awareness as a woman, and also Kang Jung-il-dang's case too. So yes, I do think that we can see some feminist consciousness is rising.
Thank you.
Thank you for the answer and the question. And then now we have two questions. And the first question will be, the next question will be goes on to the Angela Shen. Yes, please turn on your mic.
Okay, thank you. I have two questions for Professor Wang. Thank you for your outstanding lecture and comments. And I wonder the Korean women philosophers you've mentioned confined their discussion to what should females do in their books, or they give more general idea about what should human live. Another question is that since they lived in a pre-modern age, and do they mention any notion about equality between males and females? According to my knowledge, we also have some women philosophers in the Chinese history. For example, we have the Confucian Four Books for Women. These four books were written by women philosophers in the Han Dynasty, the Tang Dynasty, and the Ming Dynasty. However, I found that they mainly wanted to educate women to be a good wife, a good mother, or a good sister. So actually, they recognize what the males want them to follow, and this is my questions.
Thank you so much for your questions. I will start, and then probably my this other discussants can help me too. I think they for these two, they pursued for the general sagehood as a human beings. But still, while they are doing that, they encountered some difficulty, the challenges or limits as a woman. So I think that's why sometimes they had to discuss up or talk about their gender. So in Yu Dang's case, that basically she hardly talks, but in one writing she had to declare that, and then discuss at length, and then discuss that although I am a woman, but because because of heavily endowed this position, there is no distinction between men and women. So I think she had to say such a thing. Also, Kang Jung-Tang's case, also because her philosophizing and her writings were based on her everyday life. So you can see very much that how then the women's lives were like that. So you can see a lot of women's perspective or deeply integrated into her writings, I think, and experience. But still, I think she was also still pursuing to become a general, Confucian sage. So I would say there is, yes, that's my the answer for your first question. And about the second question about the equality between men and women. First of all, you also mentioned then, the four books for women. And that was why actually I was asked Professor Ivanhoe about what do you think about Banzhao? And of course, this, I have to mention that there are many, I said, arguably the first woman Confucian philosopher, because we are still philosophizing. And one of the feminist feminist project is to reread, right, the previously unrecognized women scholars. Like it can be also the four books for women. And for example, like M. Peng White at Scranton University, she's doing taking the project to philosophize and that the Chinese women in the history, rereading more philosophically. So I think yes, that can be done. How we do that, but when we said that arguably they are still more first the philosophers, as Professor Ivan said, because they were self-consciously called themselves as a philosopher, neo-Confucian philosopher, and then also their study and their work was in the more or less within the traditional neo-Confucian philosophy. So I think that is one of the reasons we stay. But still, yes, it's open for the more further discuss and development, I would say. So more answering to your second question more directly, yes, they believe in the equality between women and men. And in Yunstang's here, maybe more correctly say, moral equality and least here. So as I have to say that, maybe not the equality we think as contemporary people, I think it would be, anachronistic, but they believe in at least moral equality between women and men. That was the beginning of, yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. And then now we move to the third question, and Professor Halakim, please turn on your mic. Yeah. Halakim, are you ready for the question? Yes?
Yes, thank you, Professor Yu. Thank you, professors. I really am happy to see you all and learn a lot from all of you. Thank you very much. Among all the female philosophers, I like the philosophy of Hong Ivanhoe the most, to tell the truth, as related by Professor Ivanhoe. But now let me be serious. I was wondering, this is a question to anybody or everybody. So let's see. Uh, is Kang or Im, were they aware of the virtue of chastity associated with the so-called 열려 in their writing, the virtuous woman, if I may ask? And my next question is, you know, Confucian sages usually practice sitting meditation, 정좌. So I was wondering if engaged in any form of meditation that you can see in their writings. Thank you.
Well, I'll take a crack at it. So, I mean, I don't know that they wrote about chastity anywhere directly, although Professor Wang can correct me if that's, but they were very much aware of this. And I would say chastity in the broader sense about that women needed to be, there was a notion of propriety about what a woman, a chaste woman would do. And they were exceedingly aware of that. And we're trying to, in some ways, navigate that the limitations that put on someone who wanted to be an intellectual and go out and meet other people. So they had to do things in within the rubric of that social milieu, right? So you know, I think, but they didn't address it directly. Although Professor Wang has done a lot of research on someone who has written on this topic at length. The other question. You know, did they engage in quiet sitting? Again, I don't know any place where they mention that. Although I'm starting to forget things, so I don't recall them talking about quiet sitting, except maybe in passing, but not describing themselves doing it. I don't believe so.
I see. Thank you.
Yeah. And then we have 15 minutes left. So is there any more question? Please raise your hands.
Oh, just a moment. Sample, Hope, did you wanted to say something?
Yeah, I was
Yeah.
just I was just curious, like some of the stuff, some of Gong's poetry seems like when I think about like the quiet sitting, I mean, she doesn't describe it. She doesn't like use that terminology. I don't think she does. But I think she does kind of have those quiet meditative moments, and I think she does use other terminology to describe it, which is not to say that but it's different than saying like, oh, there's a tradition of quiet, you know, a Confucian tradition of quiet meditative sitting that she's connecting to versus just saying that it seems like she's doing that to me, like when you look at her poetry. I don't know if you guys agree or if that's fair. Like, would you say that's fair to say? Like, even if she's not identifying herself with that there are moments in her poetry that kind of it
I
seems
think
like.
it's totally fair.
Okay,
It's
yeah.
totally fair. I recently, it's going to be published, but the Confucian Contemplative Studies Journal and talk about like quiet sitting in Confucian tradition, not Buddhist, and not in Buddhist tradition, just like she did, like, you know, contemplating nature, thinking quietly, and somehow like taking care of their body so tidy and clean, and kind of a lot of things. And Jung did the same thing, and Tege did, and I think Gang did.
The usual term that is associated with that is kyung, jing, or the reverential seriousness. So another way of asking the same question would be, do they ever discuss the concept of kyung or reverential seriousness?
Well, that's there's no doubt about that. Yes, they talked about that in a number of essays. But I took your question to be about Qingzuo, and
Well,
that that's a practice. It's not. I mean, I sit in the morning and I look out at our little lake, and I watch the morning mist. But I don't think that I'm really engaging in Qingzuo in the way that Zhu Xi did. He set aside a time in the morning when time of day he would do this as a meditative practice, and he described a particular posture and all of that. So that's what I took your question as. Did they talk about that? No. Did they engage in meditation? I think everything they did was in some ways, or many of the things they did were forms of meditation. And they absolutely talked about reverential attention, Kyung or Jing. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely agreeing with everything my colleagues said. And I just also want to add about your first question that if we remember how in Zhejiang lived, then actually when she lost her husband quite early after her marriage, only several years later, then she didn't commit suicide, but she she still stayed with her in-laws and she did not get remarried. So that it was a kind of, yes, she didn't, they didn't talk explicitly about that chastity, definitely, but you can probably glimpse they knew it and then they lived according to some the traditional ideas.
So, is there any comments or question? We have more than 10 minutes. Maybe there is Professor Chen. No sample.
If no one
Professor-
else, if no one
Yeah.
else wants to go, I'm not. Okay, I just had a thought when Professor Wang was talking about, is sagehood a collective enterprise rather than an individual achievement? Because I think something, because I think I was having this kind of individualistic kind of way of thinking about it, but is that wrong? And yeah, I would love to hear, feels like maybe something's off about that, and I'd like to hear, what's off, if I'm wrong, or is it like this person has made it and that's all there is to it.
Maybe I can start briefly and then probably Professor Ivan can actually add more on that. I think that that's probably a very important, actually catch. Maybe we can just definitely worth to discuss more. I think it's both. Because in my understanding of Confucianism and Neo-Confucianism, that yes, we do cultivate ourselves, but it's not only for ourselves, right? Because self is understood as an interrelational being. So we, even individuals, we are born into this web of human relationships. We do, cultivate ourselves. What is the use to cultivate yourself if you don't think about other people, right? So, and that's one thing. And then also, secondly, that if you think about for example, the Dashi, the great learning, there are stages. We start with ourself, the family, and then bigger communities, even the whole world, right, under the heaven. So the sagehood is actually should embrace all these areas. So I think that in the sense, it should be also the collective enterprise. What do you think, PJ?
Okay. Yeah, I think you're right on. And I think that this is, at least in the broad strokes, is a difference between a lot of Western theological kinds of concerns where your aim is personal salvation with a relationship with a deity, which is very highly personalized. Of course, there are variations on this in every tradition, but I'd say that that's a generalization I think I could defend. But I think it would be even more dramatic. I mean, I think what you said is right, but I mean, at least from the I would say broadly, the point of view is the idea that salvation could be a personal concern is in a certain way dysfunctional, right? I mean, there are a number of people. Hwa Yeong Wang talks about this. Jushi talks about it. That says the more your virtue increases, the less aware you are of your own virtue. And if you're thinking too much about your own virtue, that's a sure sign that you're not virtuous, right? So there's this kind of self-effacing thing about us. And, I mean, they say the true sage does not have a mind of their own. Sages don't have a mind. They take the mind of the world as their own. And so, it's a conundrum, and it gets more dramatic with the Neo-Confucians who have taken on board a lot of ideas from Buddhism, and the evacuation of the self becomes more of a term, I mean, more of a goal. But in Confucianism, it's always kind of an expanding of the self to more like the bodhisattva ideal of saving all of the world, all of Tianxia. So yeah, I think it's very much a personal endeavor, but it's fraught with the threat of making it about me. You know, you're not going to be the sage who says, okay, I'm the sage, but enough about me. What do you think of me? Right? They're not going to have that level of self-consciousness, and they almost many Neo-Confucians talk about this and tag it as just an inherent challenge, this tension between self and take being for the world. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's time is almost done. So thank you all of that for good discussions and good talks. And then I just as a moderator, I hope that there will be kinds of female Confucian talks or conversation or any studies across the culture, maybe Korean and Chinese and Japanese female Confucians, how they talk about equality, such like that. We talk about more, or if we discuss more on just female Confucians in the future, it'd be very great. And then now I just need to give my mic to Professor Paul for a closing remark, maybe.
And I'd like to thank you, Professor Yu, for an excellent job.
Yeah, I really love to see you guys here. Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you, everyone. I think that was a fantastic discussion. And I also hope we have more. We've had quite a number of discussions and talks on feminism and on women-related issues, but I think this is our first Korean dedicated discussion. So hopefully we can get more.
Yes.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
It'll be Japanese also.
Yeah, and also we should get some Japanese in there. So
Yeah.
thank you guys so
Chinese.
much.
All right.